All right, so today we're diving into something a little different.
Yeah.
The world of psychopaths.
Ooh, exciting.
But not like the Hollywood, slasher film version.
Right.
We're talking about everyday psychopaths, like the coworker, the boss,
Yeah.
maybe even someone you're dating.
Right.
You sent us excerpts from Surrounded by Psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to know, how can you spot one in real life?
Well, the book really dives into the idea that psychopaths are way more common than we think.
Yeah.
And it's not all, axe murderers and Hannibal Lecters.
Right.
We're talking 2 to 4% of the population blended right into society.
That's a pretty startling statistic.
It is.
So what's like the first thing we should know about spotting these everyday psychopaths?
Well, the book starts off with a fascinating story, actually,
Okay.
about the author meeting this young man who wanted to learn about personality types. Specifically, how to use that knowledge to his advantage.
Oh, interesting.
And there's something about this guy's smile. It's described as this, calculated grimace that immediately sets off alarm bells.
Yeah.
It really sets the stage for the book's argument that psychopaths don't just understand systems like the DISC model, they actually weaponize them.
Okay, so let's talk about that DISC model for a second.
Right.
So we've got our 4 colors. Red for dominant yellow, for
Yeah.
influential green for stable,
Yeah.
and blue for conscientious.
Mm-hmm.
So how would a psychopath use this system to manipulate someone?
Well, think of it this way. Psychopaths see your strength as weaknesses that they can exploit.
Okay.
So take a red personality, for example. Your classic driven assertive type.
Yeah.
They might be vulnerable to someone pretending to be subservient, feeding their need for control.
So the psychopath is basically like playing a role, mirroring back what that red wants to see.
Exactly. And because psychopaths are so good at reading people,
Right.
they can tailor their approach to each DISC type.
Oh, wow.
So for a yellow, someone who thrives on social interaction and approval, they might shower them with attention and praise. It's like they create this perfect reflection, making the other person feel totally seen and understood, only to yank it away later as a form of control.
Oh, that's so devious.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they're playing on those deep-seated insecurities
Absolutely.
that everyone has.
And it's important to remember that these manipulations exist on a spectrum.
Right.
Sometimes it's harmless influence, like
Yeah.
your friend convincing you to see their favorite movie.
Right.
But when it crosses the line into controlling behavior, that's where it gets dangerous.
So we've got this idea that psychopaths are masters of manipulation.
Yeah.
But how do we know if we're even dealing with one in the first place?
Right.
The book mentions a whole list of psychopathic traits.
Yeah.
What are some of the red flags to watch out for?
One of the biggest ones is this constant need for stimulation.
Oh,
These
man.
individuals get bored so easily,
Yeah.
always chasing the next thrill,
Right.
often at the expense of others.
They might jump from job to job, relationship to relationship, always leaving a trail of chaos in their wake.
I see.
It's this restlessness that makes it so hard for them to commit to anything or anyone.
That actually reminds me of a story from the book about this family inheritance.
Oh, yeah.
This elderly man passes away, leaving his money to his wife and 5 kids.
Okay.
But one of the sons, exhibiting these classic psychopathic traits,
Yeah.
swindles everyone out of their share
Oh, wow.
and disappears.
That's a perfect example of another key trait.
Okay.
Irresponsibility.
Okay.
Psychopaths have a complete disregard for consequences, whether it's debts, commitments, or even hurting the people closest to them.
Wow.
They live in the moment,
Yeah.
taking what they want without a shred of guilt or remorse.
And they often have this parasitic lifestyle.
Yes.
Right?
Relying on others to support them financially or emotionally.
Exactly.
They're masters at playing the victim.
Spinning these elaborate stories to gain sympathy and exploit people's good nature.
Yeah.
They might even use charm and charisma to draw you in, making you feel special. Like you're the only one who truly understands them.
And then there's the lack of empathy, right?
Yes.
The book talks about how psychopaths can understand emotions. They just don't feel them the same way.
Right.
They can mimic empathy, which makes them even more dangerous.
It's what allows them to cause immense pain and suffering without batting an eye.
Wow.
The book actually recounts the author's own experience with a stalker.
Oh, gosh.
A woman who fabricated stories, manipulated people on social media, and caused real damage before the police finally intervened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So now that we have a better understanding of these traits,
Right.
let's get into the nitty-gritty
Okay.
of manipulation techniques.
Right.
The book breaks down a whole arsenal of tactics they use.
It does.
What are some common ones that we might encounter in everyday life?
One that really stands out and is a surprisingly common
is love bombing. Love bombing.
Yeah, think of it as an avalanche of affection. Flowers, compliments, grand gestures. It all feels amazing at first.
Yeah.
But it's a calculated tactic to trap you in the relationship before you can even see the red flags.
So they basically overwhelm you with this, like, intense affection.
Yes.
Making you feel like you found the one.
Yeah.
But it's all an act.
Right. It's like they're creating this perfect illusion to lure you in.
Yeah.
And it can be incredibly difficult to break free once you're caught in their web.
And it's not just in romantic relationships either.
No, not at all.
Think about like a new boss.
Right.
Who showers you with praise and promises, only to turn on you later.
Exactly.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's like you can't trust your own instincts.
Right.
Because they're so good at playing the part. So what are some other techniques that they use?
Another common one is gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
You know that feeling when you start to doubt your own memories or sanity? Like, you swear you straightened that picture, but it's crooked again.
Okay. Yeah.
Or maybe you remember a conversation differently than they do, and they insist you're wrong, making you question your own version of events.
Yeah.
Gaslighting is all about undermining your confidence and making you dependent on them for validation. It's a very subtle form of manipulation, but it can be incredibly damaging over time.
The book gives this crazy anecdote about the author's stalker fabricating this entire outing.
Oh, wow.
With someone named Annalie.
Really?
It never happened, but she described it in such vivid detail that the author started to doubt their own memory.
That's a classic example of how they distort reality to make you question your own perception.
Wow.
And because psychopaths are so good at reading people, they know exactly which buttons to push to make you doubt yourself.
And then there's triangle drama, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where they introduce a third party, either real or imagined, to create jealousy and insecurity.
It's a classic divide and conquer tactic, designed to make you feel insecure and dependent on their approval.
Right.
They might compare you to someone else, hint at other romantic interests, or even fabricate entire rivals to keep you on edge.
It's all about keeping you off balance, questioning yourself.
Yes.
And constantly seeking their validation.
Exactly.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
No, right?
So with all these scary tactics, is there any hope for protecting ourselves?
Absolutely. The key is awareness.
Okay.
Now that you know what to look for, you can start to spot those red flags and patterns of behavior.
So it's about educating yourself and trusting your gut when something feels off.
Exactly. Remember, this isn't about becoming paranoid. It's about becoming informed.
Right.
And the book goes on to offer some really practical advice on how to resist these manipulations and rebuild your personal integrity.
Okay.
But we'll save that for the next part of our deep dive.
All right, sounds good.
So you're saying even though we might know our DISC-type psychopaths can still use that knowledge against us.
That's what's so unnerving, right?
Yeah.
The book dives deeper into how each DISC color is specifically targeted. It's almost like a psychopath playbook for exploiting our personalities.
Yeah.
Let's start with the reds, those take-charge types. How do psychopaths manipulate them?
So imagine a red walking into a room with confidence focused on goals and results. Now picture a psychopath mirroring that energy right back at them. They use words like efficiency, strategy, action, hitting all the right notes for a red.
So they're basically feeding the red's ego.
Yes.
Making them feel like they've found a kindred spirit.
Precisely, but it's all a facade.
Right.
While the red is busy strategizing, the psychopath is likely manipulating them into taking on their problems or even taking credit for their work.
Okay, but the book paints reds as these like strong, decisive personalities. How are they so easily fooled?
Well, even the most driven individuals have blind spots.
Yeah.
Reds often hate dealing with details.
Right.
They're impatient, and they might neglect relationships in favor of achieving their goals. And a skilled psychopath can exploit these weaknesses, overwhelming them with information, creating a sense of urgency, and isolating them from people who might offer a different perspective.
The book mentions this example of Pernilla, a red CEO brought in to turn around a struggling company.
Right.
She's paired with Mike, a seemingly helpful subordinate.
Yeah.
Who positions himself as her right-hand man.
Classic.
And while Pernilla is focused on the big picture, Mike is subtly manipulating her into solving his problems, deflecting blame, and enjoying all the perks of his position without any of the accountability.
It's a classic example of a psychopath preying on a red's need for control and their aversion to getting bogged down in details.
Wow, that's a cautionary tale for any high-achieving red out there.
It is.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about yellows. Social butterflies of the DISC world.
Oh.
The book suggests there's a fine line between some yellow behaviors and psychopathy. What makes them such easy targets?
Well, think about what drives a yellow personality.
Yeah.
Connection, attention, the desire to be liked.
Mm-hmm.
Psychopaths are experts at tapping into those needs initially. It's like they turn on the charm full blast, making the yellow feel like the most fascinating person in the room.
So they're using that love bombing tactic we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Showering them with compliments and attention.
Exactly. And because yellows thrive on social validation, this intense admiration can be intoxicating.
Oh, yeah.
But once the psychopath has secured their trust, the manipulation begins.
And what kind of manipulations are we talking about?
Well, remember, yellows can be insecure, easily offended, and prone to gossip.
Right.
The psychopath might plant seeds of doubt, subtly turning the yellow against their friends and family, isolating them from their support system.
The book tells this heartbreaking story about Lars, a yellow guy who gets completely manipulated by Anna. She convinces him that his best friend is talking behind his back, driving a wedge between them.
That's the insidious nature of these manipulations. By the time the yellow realizes what's happening, they're often isolated and emotionally dependent on the psychopath.
Okay, let's move on to greens, the peacemakers, the conflict avoidant types. They seem like the least likely targets for manipulation, would you say?
You would think so, right? But greens have their own unique set of vulnerabilities.
Okay.
They crave harmony, they're overly trusting, and they often put others' needs before their own.
Right.
A psychopath sees this as an open invitation.
So how would they target a green?
By playing the victim.
Oh.
They might exaggerate their problems, fabricate sob stories, anything to trigger the green's empathy and guilt.
So it's like they're weaponizing the green's kindness,
Mm-hmm.
turning their compassion against them.
Precisely. The book gives this example of Ed, who manipulates Katie, a green, into emptying their children's savings accounts
Oh my God.
to fund his lavish lifestyle. He plays the victim, making her feel responsible for his happiness and financial well-being.
That's just awful.
It is.
And because greens hate conflict, they're less likely to stand up for themselves or question what's happening.
Exactly. They'll bend over backwards to avoid rocking the boat, even at their own expense. Which is why it's so important for greens to learn to recognize these manipulative tactics and set healthy boundaries.
All right, last but not least, we have the blues. The book describes them as detail-oriented, logical, even perfectionistic. Are they immune to manipulation?
Not entirely. While blues are less likely to fall for emotional appeals or charm, they do have their weaknesses.
Okay.
They can be overly trusting of facts and figures.
Right.
They might struggle with social cues and sometimes prioritize logic over intuition.
So how would a psychopath target someone like that?
By creating elaborate lies disguised as data, they might fabricate reports, manipulate statistics, anything to make their deception seem credible and logical.
And because blues are so detail-oriented, they might get lost in those details, missing the bigger picture, the red flags that something is amiss.
The book uses the example of George, a meticulous controller at a company who was systematically undermined by a psychopathic coworker named Roger Sword. Roger spreads rumors and subtly manipulates situations to make George look incompetent.
And because George is so focused on proving his accuracy, he misses the fact that he's being framed. It's a chilling reminder that even the most logical, analytical person can fall victim to a well-crafted manipulation.
That's why understanding your DISC type is only part of the equation. You need to develop those self-protection strategies, learn to trust your gut, and recognize manipulation regardless of your personality profile.
So the book offers 6 steps for rebuilding what it calls personal integrity.
It does.
Let's dive into those, starting with recognizing that manipulation is happening. What are some red flags we should be watching out for?
Well, it starts with paying attention to how you feel. Do you consistently feel anxious, guilty, or confused in a particular relationship? Do you find yourself constantly apologizing or doubting your own perception of reality? Those are major red flags.
The book also stresses the importance of looking for patterns of behavior, not just isolated incidents.
Okay.
Like if someone repeatedly forgets their wallet or conveniently misinterprets your words to their advantage.
Exactly. Psychopaths are masters at creating plausible deniability, making their actions seem like innocent mistakes or misunderstandings. But when those mistakes become a pattern, it's time to take notice.
All right, step 2 is detaching emotionally, which seems incredibly difficult, especially if you're dealing with someone you care about.
It is tough, but crucial. Remember, psychopaths feed off your emotional reactions. Anger, guilt, fear, it's all fuel for their manipulation. So you need to learn to observe their tactics without getting swept up in the emotional drama.
It's like the book says, imagine you're watching a movie. You can be engrossed in the story, feel for the characters, but you don't let it dictate your emotions in real life.
That's a perfect analogy. Detachment allows you to see the manipulation for what it is, a tactic, not a genuine emotional response.
Okay, step 3, slow down the conversation. Why is this so important when dealing with the manipulator?
Well, think about it. Manipulators thrive on speed and urgency.
Right.
They might bombard you with information demands or accusations, leaving you little time to process what's happening or think critically.
So it's like they're trying to bypass your rational mind,
Yes.
triggering an emotional response instead.
Precisely. So slowing things down is essential. Take a breath, ask for clarification, or simply say, I need some time to think about this.
The book gives the example of a manipulator pressuring you to take on a huge project. Instead of immediately agreeing or disagreeing, buy yourself some time by saying, let me check my schedule, or I need to understand the scope before I commit.
Exactly. That pause, that moment of reflection allows you to step back from the pressure and assess the situation more objectively. It might even make the manipulator reconsider their approach.
Right. Step 4, deprogramming those negative emotions, the fear, the worry, the guilt that the manipulator has instilled in you. How do you even begin to unravel that?
It starts with recognizing that those emotions aren't always justified. Manipulators are masters at creating a climate of fear and guilt, making you feel responsible for their actions or emotions.
It's like when a manipulator blames you for their bad mood,
Right.
making you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around them.
Exactly. So start challenging those feelings. Ask yourself, is this really my fault? Am I truly responsible for their happiness?
And if the answer is no, then you can start replacing those negative thoughts with more empowering beliefs.
The book suggests practicing self-compassion, reminding yourself that you deserve to be treated with respect, and recognizing that you are not responsible for another person's emotions.
Okay, step 5, addressing the manipulation directly. This seems like the most challenging step, especially for those of us who aren't naturally confrontational.
It can be daunting, but it's also incredibly empowering. Remember, manipulators thrive on silence and compliance. Speaking up, setting boundaries, and calling out their tactics is crucial for breaking free from their control.
And the book offers a really helpful communication formula for doing just that. It goes, when you do X, I feel Y. If you did Z instead, I would feel.
It's brilliant because it focuses on observable behavior, expresses your emotions clearly, and provides an alternative for more respectful communication.
The book uses the example of a manipulator who constantly raises their voice to get their way. Using the formula, you might say, when you raise your voice, I feel intimidated and disrespected. If you lowered your voice and spoke to me calmly, I would feel heard and respected.
Exactly. And notice how it avoids blaming or accusing the manipulator. It simply states the facts, expresses your feelings, and offers a clear path for better communication.
All right, final step, outlining your conditions for continuing the relationship. What does this entail?
It's about drawing a line in the sand. You've recognized the manipulation, you've addressed it directly, and now you're setting clear boundaries for what you will and will not tolerate.
The book emphasizes that this isn't about controlling the other person. It's about protecting yourself.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your power and autonomy, setting clear expectations for respectful behavior, and being willing to walk away if those expectations aren't met.
So it's almost like an ultimatum.
Yeah.
Either change your behavior or I'm out.
Essentially, yes. And while it might sound harsh, it's actually a sign of self-respect and a commitment to building healthier relationships.
And the book acknowledges that this ultimatum might lead to the end of the relationship, right?
It might. And honestly, if that happens, it's a good thing. It means you've freed yourself from a toxic dynamic and opened yourself up to the possibility of finding healthier, more fulfilling connections.
It's a powerful reminder that you have the right to choose who you let into your life and how you allow them to treat you. But what about those situations where you can't just walk away, like with family members or certain work situations?
That's where things get really tricky, and unfortunately, the book doesn't offer easy answers. It briefly touches on those unavoidable scenarios, but mostly emphasizes distancing yourself as much as possible.
So it's basically damage control in those cases.
In a way, yes. It's about minimizing the damage and protecting yourself as best you can. And that leads us to the book's ultimate advice limit, contact with psychopaths as much as possible. It sounds harsh, but sometimes the most self-preserving move is to walk away from a toxic situation.
So it's like we've learned all these self-defense moves, but what happens when you're stuck in the ring with someone who just doesn't play by the rules? The book seems to suggest that distancing yourself is the best defense,
Right.
but that's not always realistic, is it?
It's a tough question, and one that the book grapples with as well.
Yeah.
Talks about situations like family relationships or unavoidable work dynamics where complete separation just isn't feasible.
The book shares this interesting story about the author's own encounter with a suspected psychopath,
Okay.
someone he knew socially. On the surface, this guy was charming, but there were some unsettling patterns, like mirroring the interests and hobbies of whoever he was dating, almost to the point of taking over their lives.
It's a great example of how psychopaths adapt their personas to fit different situations. They're
Yeah.
like chameleons,
Right.
blending in and reflecting back what people want to see. And in this case, the author ultimately chose to distance himself, recognizing that any attempts to confront or reason with this individual would likely be futile.
It reminds me of that saying, don't try to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig.
Exactly. And as harsh as it sounds, it's really about prioritizing your own well-being.
Yeah.
Trying to change a psychopath or appeal to their sense of empathy is often a losing battle. They simply don't operate by the same emotional rules as most people.
The book makes this point that psychopaths see relationships as transactions,
Right.
people as pawns in their game. So traditional conflict resolution strategies often backfire
Yeah.
because they're using your empathy and willingness to compromise against you.
It's like trying to reason with a computer program that's been designed to manipulate you. You're speaking different languages.
So what are we supposed to do in those unavoidable situations? Just live in a
But-
constant state of paranoia, suspecting everyone around us.
Not at all. Remember, knowledge is power. This deep dive has given you a framework for understanding psychopathic traits, recognizing manipulation tactics, and protecting yourself. It's not about being fearful. It's about being informed.
Like learning defensive driving.
Yeah,
You don't assume every car on the road is going to hit you,
Right.
but you stay alert and drive defensively.
Exactly. And while the book doesn't offer a step-by-step guide for dealing with psychopaths in every scenario, it does offer some valuable insights. It emphasizes the importance of emotional detachment, setting firm boundaries, and refusing to engage in their games.
So in a way, it's like playing chess with a grandmaster.
Mm-hmm.
You need to anticipate their moves, protect your pieces, and realize that sometimes the best move is to walk away from the board.
That's a great analogy. And that's where self-awareness becomes so crucial. Understanding your own vulnerabilities, your DISC type, and your personal values can help you navigate those complex situations. It's about knowing yourself, your triggers, and the kinds of manipulations you're most susceptible to.
It sounds like this deep dive has been about so much more than just psychopaths.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding human behavior,
Yeah.
recognizing manipulation in all its forms, and empowering ourselves to build healthier relationships.
Absolutely. It's about taking control of our own narratives, even in a world where some people operate by a different set of rules.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
Stay alert, trust your gut, and never underestimate the power of self-awareness. Even in a world where psychopaths exist, you have the power to choose who you let into your life and how you allow them to treat you.
And on that empowering note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Surrounded by Psychopaths. Remember, knowledge is power, and now you have the tools to navigate those complex human interactions with more confidence and awareness. Thanks for listening.